Alright, so let's color grade some Sony ZV-E10 S-Log2 footage in DaVinci Resolve. But before I start, I do want to mention a couple of things. First of all, I'm using a brand new quarter black mist filter today from the company Walk-In Way. This filter is pretty cheap, it's about 20 bucks. So hopefully the footage looks okay. Maybe somewhat throughout the video I'm going to compare it to my actual mist filter from Freewheel, which is significantly more expensive, just to show you how it compares to a more expensive filter. If you're interested in this, I'm going to leave a link for it down below. And also, this video is not going to be towards beginners because I'm going to be pretty technical and use a lot of plugins and stuff like that. And finally, I am going to use paid plugins to color grade the shot today because it makes it a bit easier and quicker for me, but you will still be able to achieve the same results I'm going to show you today with the free native tools in Resolve. It's just going to be slightly clunkier and slower to do it than using paid plugins. And also, I'm going to leave links down below to all the paid plugins I'm going to mention in this video for you to check out. That said, let's start. So first of all, let's go through the project color management settings. I'm using DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate for the timeline color space, and then Rec. 709 Type A for the output color space because I'm grading on a MacBook display. Next, I also got this reference frame from the new Jurassic Park movie because I think the color grade from here is going to work very well with my shot because the environment and lighting is more or less the same. So first thing I'm going to do to this shot in here is apply my Sony ZV-E10 node tree, just to have like a good starting point. If you are interested in this node tree, I'm going to leave a link for it down below. It's not going to look exactly the same as in here because I'm using a lot of plugins, but it's going to be more or less the same. So first of all, let me go through the technical stuff. IDT and ODT. Input device transform basically takes me from Rec. 709 Sony S-Log2, and the reason I'm using Rec. 709 color space is because that's what I set on my Sony ZV-E10. I basically used ITU 709 matrix, which is the one I recommend using if you want to achieve a slightly less noisy image when shooting in S-Log2 with the Sony ZV-E10. And then for the output color space here, I'm using DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. And for the ODT, I'm using a costume DRT from JP2499, which is completely free. I've made a whole video about DRTs. If you want to watch it, you can click here. And if you want to download this DRT, I'm going to leave a link for it down below. And this DRT basically takes me from DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate to Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4 BT1886. And the reason I'm using this is because as of now, in the display settings of my MacBook, I've set it to BT1886, basically Gamma 2.4. Well, first thing I'm going to do is select Dehancer, open the effects in here, click Shift F, click this comparison button in here to see the frames side by side, and I'm going to select a film emulation in Dehancer just to get a good starting point that looks very close to the reference frame, just to get the grade as quickly as possible. So let me go through the profiles in here. Not this, maybe gold. Oh, gold kind of looks nice. Let me see other ones. Hector is also pretty good, usually. So far, gold is my favorite one. I also like the arrow color. Where is it? This one. Also nice. And maybe lastly, let's start the Fujifilm Fuji Color 1600. I think I'm gonna go with the gold one. The gold one, but I'm gonna set it here to like 1.2. So now I can close this. Click Shift F again. Disable the comparison mode, and now we have like a good starting point. Next, I'm definitely going to adjust the exposure because it's a bit too bright, and the reason it's bright is because I exposed to the right when shooting this shot with the Sony ZV-E10, which I highly recommend doing if you want to get clean shadows and with your Sony ZV-E10 footage when shooting in S-Log2, because as you can see, I don't have any noise in the shadows, and if I would expose S-Log2 correctly in here, I would have a bunch of noise in the black parts in here and also in here and whatnot. So let me just go to the primaries node in here, which is where I adjust the contrast and exposure, and then use the primaries color wheels and more specifically the offset wheel to globally reduce the exposure in the frame. Just gonna put the reference frame right beside here and just go down until it looks somewhat similar, which I would say is about here. Also, as you can see, my contrast here is already set to 1.15 by default, and my pivot is set to 0.336. And the reason I set it to here is because the middle gray for DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate is 0.336. And by setting the pivot to this number, it makes it more accurate when you actually add contrast with the slider in here. But I feel like it's a bit too much contrast in here, so I'm going to slightly reduce it. Put it to like 1.075. Now it looks much closer. Still a bit too bright, so I'm going to lower it down even more with offset wheel. So about here. And then I'm gonna go to the contrast node in here, which is where I add a filmic contrast. And what I mean by filmic is basically contrast with slightly elevated shadows and compressed highlights, which is usually what you see naturally when shooting on film. So for this, I'm actually using a plugin, a paid plugin that I got for like 25, 30 bucks. I don't really remember, but it basically does the same thing as a curve in here with like points and whatnot, but it's a bit quicker to use because you have like sliders and you can quickly readjust the contrast if necessary without playing with points. Let me open the curve in here just to show you what it does. It's basically like a classic S curve with elevated shadows and compressed highlights. And basically with these sliders, I can adjust the intensity of everything in the curve. So first of all, I feel like the contrast is a bit too strong. So I'm gonna put it to about here, maybe slightly more. And then I can play with the blacks, which basically allows me to control how faded the blacks are, which is something you cannot do this quickly with the built-in curves. So I'm gonna put it to about here, 0.05 I would say. Then I'm gonna play with the toe strength, which is going to allow me to adjust the gradient or transition between basically the blacks, the shadows, into the midtones or middle gray. And I feel like I'm gonna put it to default setting 0.5, looks fine. And then I'm also gonna play with the whites, which basically will allow me to compress the highlights if I want to, as you can see. Just gonna find like a sweet spot, which is I would say about here. Let's do 0.5 just to be safe. And then I can also play with the shoulder strength, just to readjust everything if necessary. And just to show you what it does on the actual curve, as you can see, it again creates like a nice gradient between the highlights and then the midtones. I'm gonna set it about here. Something like this looks okay. And let's do now a before and after. This is before and after, before and after. As you can see, it mainly adds contrast in the middle of the frame and not necessarily in the shadows or in the pure highlights, basically the whites. All right, with this done, the next thing I'm going to do is adjust slightly the white balance with this balance node, just to get like a good starting point to actually start color grading. This node's gamma is set to linear. This allows me to basically adjust the white balance in a more photometric way. And I'm just going to use the color wheels and more specifically the gain wheel to adjust basically the color in this shot. So I feel like it's a bit too warm. So because of this, I'm going to add a bit blue. And also maybe readjust it with the red here, just to make it look more natural in a way. I mainly look at the whites in the waves in here, just to see when they look actually white, as much as possible at least. So I would say it's somewhere around here. I'm gonna do it before and after, before and after. As you can see, before it was a bit like greenish in a way, and now it looks a bit more white and more color accurate. Actually, maybe it's a bit too red. I'm gonna reduce the red a bit. Increase the grain, and somewhere around here again, before and after, before and after. All right, next let's add some saturation. I'm going to use this node in here. I've set its color space to HSV, and then I disabled channel 1 and channel 3, which basically allows me to only add saturation with this node. And I'm mainly going to use the gamma and gain wheel to do it. And if I'm going to increase the gamma, as you can see, basically adds subtractive filmic cinematic saturation. So I'm going to slightly increase it in the gamma to about here, and then subtract the gain just to balance everything out. I would say somewhere around here looks okay. This is the before and after, before and after. Let's compare it to the reference frame. All right, now I'm going to add a power window in here just to emphasize the subject even more. And in this frame, the subject is definitely the bridge and the water in here. And because this is like a still tripod shot, it's going to be very easy to create like a window. It's going to select the power window node in here, power window 1, go to my window, select the circular window, you know, reshape it to something like this, then soften it, invert this just to affect everything outside of this selection, go to the color wheels, disable this, and then only use the gamma wheel to basically darken the outside of the frame, or add basically like a creative vignette, if you will. Just want to emphasize the middle portion in here even more. And maybe also I'm going to use this out one node, which is going to affect everything outside of this selection, or more specifically, it's going to affect everything inside this bridge and water and whatnot. And I'm just going to play with the gamma and increase the exposure a bit. Let me balance it out with the lift. Something like that. Go back to power window 1, create a vignette even stronger. And I feel like this is a bit better. Here is a before and after, before and after. As you can see, it just emphasizes the subject in the frame slightly more than before. All right, now let's play around with the hues in the frame just to get my shot slightly closer to the reference frame. And I'm going to use this hue node for that. And again, I'm going to use a plugin to do it, to adjust the hues and whatnot, but you can definitely use the color slice page to do something very similar, or you can use the hue, you know, versus hue curves and hue versus saturation and luminance to do pretty much the same thing. So first thing I'm going to do is definitely play around with the yellows and the reds in here because they look significantly different than what is in the reference frame. First of all, it's a bit too saturated, so I'm going to desaturate the reds. I would say minus 0.15, and then I'm going to increase the density of these colors and maybe shift the hue a bit more so it looks something similar to the reference frame. I would say about here, before and after, before and after. Also, maybe I'm gonna go to the global density slider in here and just increase it a bit more, just to increase the density in the shot. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at here, 0.225 looks okay to me. Now let's play around with the yellows. Going to desaturate the yellows a bit, increase the density, and maybe shift the hues. Or actually not, I'm not gonna touch the hues, but I'm gonna add back some saturation, definitely. Let me see. Yeah, this looks much better. And maybe also with the skin section in here, I'm gonna do some stuff. Increase the density a bit more, play with the hue. I'm gonna slightly push it towards red, just a touch. Like 0.02, and then maybe slightly increase the saturation. And also maybe I'm going to warm up the greens in here. So let me go to the green hue. And as you can see, if I'm going to zoom in here, it's going to basically warm up the greens. But just not too much because it can break the 8-bit S-Log2 footage pretty easily. Maybe even increase the saturation. Let's see if the cyan does something. Not really, I'm gonna leave it as is. The blue. Yeah, the blue actually does something, so I'm going to increase the density of this and maybe shift it towards like a cyan color a bit and slightly increase the saturation to something like this. And I feel like I am much closer now to the reference frame. Right, next I'm going to use this split node in here just to add a beautiful split on effect between the shadows and highlights. I'm basically going to inject one color in the shadows and usually the opposite color in the highlights to create a beautiful split tones, a split tone again between the shadow and highlights. And I'm going to use the plugin from Pixel Tools. For that, I've made a video about this plugin actually a couple of weeks ago. If you want to check it out, I'm going to leave it up here. But what this plugin basically allows me to do is to quickly inject one color in the shadows and then another color in the highlights. You can do the same thing with the color wheels, with the curves and whatnot, but again, a plugin like this makes it a bit quicker for me and accurately at the same time to do it in Resolve. If I look at the reference frame, first of all, in the shadows, we have like warmth, we have like yellow, green, like teal tones, something like that, which looks beautiful in this jungle environment. So to replicate this, I'm going to go to the lows, add more teal by subtracting red basically. And then I'm also going to add some warmth by subtracting blue. Let's do -12 and then -10. And now if I'm gonna do a before and after, we look much more like the reference frame, and it was so easy and simple to do, okay? And maybe also I'm going to add more warmth to the highlights, because if I look at the highlights in here, and then in here, we have a lot of like warm colors basically in the highlights of the frame. And whereas in my shot, it looks a bit cold. So first thing I'm going to do is go to the high sliders in here, which is going to add color to the brightest parts of the frame. And I'm going to just inject yellow in them, as you can see. And I'm going to also add some red and green just to balance it out. And also I'm going to go with the high mid and actually increase the red, I would say to about 10. And then subtract blue to add more warmth. I would say like -10. Maybe even more, -15. And then play around with the green just to rebalance everything. Actually gonna add like 7 on the green and then reduce the red to like 7 as well. And now it looks much closer. Actually, mine is a bit warmer than the reference frame, but I can just take this mid-tone sliders in here and rebalance basically the middle part of the frame. And because my shot is slightly warmer, from what I can see, I can just add a tad of blue, maybe like 1.5 of blue, right? And then maybe subtract some red. A little bit, like -0.2. And here we have a much more, closer result. I still feel like it's a bit too strong. So I'm just gonna go to the blend slider in here, which allows me to adjust the intensity of this effect. I can go to 200 to make it even stronger, or I can go lower. And I'm gonna set it was at 100 by default, I'm gonna set it to about 80. And now, if I'm going to do like a side-by-side comparison, it looks much, much closer. I can also use this clean black sliders just to clean up the blacks and whatnot, but I'm not going to do it because I want to keep some of the green, warm, dirty look in the shadows. And also, I'm not going to keep the whites clean. I'm going to set it to 0 just to, again, keep the warmth in the highlights. And maybe with a neutral pivot, let me see if I can do anything. Maybe I'm going to set it to about 10. Just to keep the middle gray as clean as possible. And I feel like I still need to do some readjustments, maybe in the high mids. Just to play around with this. Okay, I'm going to also play with the low mids. Set it to like -5. And warm it up even more in the shadows, -2. Then I'm gonna lower this to like 13, 10, then -20. Now let's take a look. Yeah, now it looks much similar. Maybe my shot is a bit too bright still, so I'm gonna go back to the primaries and slightly darken it. About here, I would say. I'm pretty close to the reference frame. Maybe I can increase slightly the vignetting with the power window, make it a bit stronger. Then here, increase it a bit more. Right, let's do a before and after. But actually, because this shot here, the whole movie was shot on film, as you can see, you have grain and you also have halation. So let me add that, and I have a special node in here for that, which is called grain. And all this is basically Dehancer, but only with the grain enabled and also the bloom. But I'm also going to enable the halation just to get that halation effect we see in here. And I'm definitely going to increase it to about, I would say, 60 millimeters. And let me just do a before and after for you guys. Here's a before and after, before and after. I feel like I can increase the intensity even more. So I'm gonna go to the output in here and set it to like 40. Basically double the amount I've had before. And this basically is going to make the image a bit more filmic, with the grain, halation and bloom. And if I'm gonna do a before and after in here, if you look at the fence, we get this beautiful halation effect, grain and also blooming in the water. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video and found it to be informative. Hopefully you learned something new today when it comes to color grading Sony ZV-E10 footage. Again, I'm going to leave links down below for all the plugins, products I've mentioned in this video, including this walking way quarter black mist filter, which, sorry, I forgot to compare to the freewheel filter because I got sucked into, like, you know, color grading the shot of today. But yeah, regardless, if you have any questions, comments, whatnot, let me know down below, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.